All right, well today we are going to build the case for the Apple I that my brother, the 8-bit guy, built. And it's important for those of you who didn't see that video to understand that this is not an original Apple I. This is a replica. Now, I say it's a replica, but it's also original, and the reason why is the only thing that's a replica is the actual PCB. Now, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak didn't assemble this in any garage in Palo Alto or anything like that, but all of the chips that are on this board are era specific. A lot of it is old stock, and so these are all the original types of chips that would have been used and were made and manufactured back in those days. So again, the only thing that's a replica really is the PCB. Now, because of that, I want to do something really cool for this board. I want to make a case that is reminiscent of the old school, the fact that this was, so here's a good point for you. So a lot of people don't understand the case that they show for the Apple I all the time is just some case some guy made in his garage. Apple never actually sold a case for the Apple I. It was up to you to make your own. So that one you see on Wikipedia, just some random dude made that in his garage. So I want to kind of latch onto that, and I want to make something that is old school, so it's got to be made out of wood, but it's also got to be sort of modern, like what would Apple do today? And so it's got to have some aluminum on it. And so we're going to do something that's a little bit old school and a little bit modern, all mixed together, and make the coolest Apple I case that I can possibly think of that will honor this board. And of course, this is the Geek Pub, so we have to do something a little bit geeky on top of all that. And let's just save that part till the very end. This video is sponsored by PCBWay. So before we get started, let's thank them for supporting us. If you're not familiar with PCBWay, their goal is to be the most professional PCB manufacturer for prototyping and low volume production work in the world. New customers get a $5 bonus on their first order. Thank you, PCBWay. I started by using the table saw to mill down some pine boards to make the outer walls of the case. I sanded them down lightly to remove the saw marks and then cut them to length on the miter saw. And as always, I like to label all of my parts as I cut them. Using these corner jigs to keep things perfectly square, I glued and clamped the sections together. The old saying that you can never have enough clamps in the shop is definitely true. Okay, so as you saw earlier, all of the corners of the box need to be rounded over. Now, that is not going to exactly be possible because there's not enough material on the corners. So in order to rectify that, I'm going to add in a couple of blocks of material, and then I can just cut that off on the bandsaw. Now, if I were Matthias Wendell, I would absolutely make a rounded box joint here, but I'm not that cool, so I'll stick with a Steve Ramsey butt joint. Now, I'm just going to glue and clamp these in place because I don't want to be hitting the brad nails with my bandsaw. I'm using a circle jig to make both the inner and outer curves, but most of the time I just use a paint can. I guess I just wanted a little more accuracy this time, or I couldn't find a paint can. Over on the bandsaw, I trim the outer curves away from the case, keeping about an 1/8 inch away from the line. I then use my bench sander to bring the material flush with the line. Now, in order to get my bandsaw blade into the inside of the box, I cut it open in the middle in a place that would be hidden later. Then I did the same operation on the inside of the box, keeping just slightly off the line. In hindsight, I probably would have made these blocks shorter. I used the spindle sander in order to clean up the bandsaw marks and bring the material to the pencil lines. Just a dab of glue and a clamp, and the entry point is back to a solid box. We need a slot on the side of the box. We'll discuss in a bit, but for now, I just marked it with a pencil and then cut it out with the jigsaw. I added glue to the bottom of the case and then flipped it over onto a sheet of 1/4 inch plywood. The plywood is slightly larger than the bottom of the case all the way around. This way I can use a flush trim bit on the router and make it align to the sides and curves of the case perfectly. Okay, so I need to cut out a piece of plywood to be the cover for the keyboard. And so that seems pretty easy. It's just going to be a piece of plywood. The keys will all poke through it. And then we'll put something decorative over this later, you'll see. But it's not as easy as it sounds because I have to cut out this intricate pattern of the way all the keys, because the keys are not squared off at all the ends. And so what I did was I went into SketchUp and I just used all the dimensions, whoops, upside down, used all the dimensions and then made a paper template. So all I have to do now is trace this onto the board and cut it out with a jigsaw. Okay, so scrap everything that I just said. Right after I said that and started to do the actual work, it occurred to me, I'm going to clad this, this is just a scrap piece. I'm going to clad the keyboard and the computer itself with some aluminum that I'm going to sand on the orbital sander to give it a real nice texture, to sort of look like the soda blasting look that a Mac Mini has. And it occurred to me it would be way, way simpler to do this operation if that metal was already attached to the wood. And so I'm just going to do that with some spray adhesive. And a lot of people don't realize that you can cut metal on a table saw. As a matter of fact, you can cut ferrous and non-ferrous metal in the right circumstances with your table saw or with your compound miter saw. There's just a couple of things you need to be aware of. Number one, this is a saw stop, so it has safety features, and we have to make sure that we turn those safety features off before we do the cut. Otherwise, the metal making contact between the blade and the surface of the table saw will set off the brake inside, which will be a bad, bad day for all of us. So you turn off the safety feature. There's just a little key that you flip on the side as you turn the saw on. And then you have to have a blade that's designed for cutting metal. Don't just run your regular table saw blade, because it will do it damage. The teeth are actually a different type of carbide, and they're actually shaped differently for cutting aluminum and non-ferrous metals. And so you can cut wood with the metal blade. It's not ideal. You can see here I've done it, and so it works fine. So switch the blade out when you just cut wood alone. But we're going to clad this wood with aluminum, cut that on the table saw, and I think that will go much faster. And then for the inset, we're going to cover that with a second sheet of plywood, and we'll cut that with a jigsaw, and that'll keep the plywood from chipping out or having these jagged edges on it. So let's get to it. Starting the saw stop without the sensor is simple. Just turn the key and then pull the start paddle. You can then safely cut electrically conductive materials like aluminum or brass. It's also necessary when cutting wet material or statically charged material. To cut the keyboard, I taped the template onto the keyboard, drilled a pilot hole, and then used the jigsaw to cut it out. I need to get my CNC out of storage, as this would have been a great use for it. But it goes to show, use the tools you have. Man, that is going to look awesome. Alright, so on the back of the case is going to be this power switch, the IEC14 input like a modern computer would have, along with a fuse. And so I think it's really important that we have a fuse especially for something of this age, to protect it from surges and those types of things. And so anyway, I need to cut a hole for this, and the simplest way I think to do that is I just made a little wood templates that's the same size. I'm going to trace that out after I add some masking tape, and then I'll just cut it out with a jigsaw. Anytime I use a power tool on something that I've just painted, I like to protect it with masking tape to prevent scratches. It also makes the lines easier to see on dark material. The key to the jigsaw is to take your time and go slow. Hey, that looks awesome. So for the aluminum that goes on the keyboard, and we're going to also eventually wrap the outside of the Apple One with the same aluminum. Apple's finish is more of a brushed finish, or more of a, it's actually really, I think, more of like a sandblasted finish. But I don't have a sandblaster or a soda blaster, so I think using these 220 grit sandpaper discs on the orbital, I mean, that seems pretty Apple-like. And I mean, that's not really finished, it's just, I just was doing some tests here. So I think that's going to work out really well. So we'll start by doing the keyboard, and then later when we cut out the wrapping for the Mac, sorry for the, that's hilarious, for the Apple One, then we'll sand it before we put it on. Sanding with 220 grit on the orbital leaves a really nice texture on the aluminum. It takes away the reflective properties, but it still leaves it looking like metal. Next up, I need to cut the acrylic top for the case. So I just used the case to roughly trace out its shape. I used the table saw to cut the basic shape. I used the bandsaw to trim the edges, and then over again to the bench sander to bring it down to the pencil lines. I did find that going slow will keep the acrylic from melting. I need to cut the aluminum that will wrap around the Apple One. To make this cut safer, I used double-sided tape and attached it to a scrap sheet of plywood. Again, the saw-stop sensors are turned off for this operation. I then used the same sanding technique as the keyboard cover. Okay, so the Apple One has a card edge connector on the side of it for adding expansion cards. And I wanted to make sure that we maintain that ability in the case, and it has a slot right here. But since this is about to get covered with aluminum, I want to make sure that I capture that hole in the aluminum. So we're going to cut that out with a jigsaw. For the keyboard, I wanted to do something to, like right now, it's going to have these exposed plywood edges, and I don't really like that. I'd like it to have a black ring around it, or a black trim around it. And so what I've done is I've cut down these just pieces of oak, just some scrap pieces I had laying around, cut them down. I'm going to put them around it like that. Of course, the keyboard will be raised up like so. It'll be flush, and I'll paint those black. I'm also going to paint the aluminum with a clear coat lacquer because I think over time the oils and stuff in your skin, I can already sort of see a few places, so I'll probably have to sand this down one more time, and then I'll just shoot that with some clear lacquer. And I've already tested it on a test piece and it looks really nice. I added glue to all of the strips and then attached them to the keyboard cover. Brad nails will hold them in place while the glue dries. I then used some isopropyl alcohol to clean the top and then gave it 3 coats of spray lacquer. I made this little L-shaped part to cover the transformers and all of the wiring. This little strip will keep it in place. It's now time to clad the outside of the Apple One case. I used spray adhesive, carefully aligned it up, and then clamped it into place. I continued to add spray adhesive, bend the aluminum gently around the corners, and clamped it into place. I'll let this dry overnight. What was it about clamps again? I want to be able to see the Apple One board through the top of the case, and so that's why I'm using this acrylic, aka plexiglass, It's a 3/8 inch thick sheet. Now, the problem with plexiglass is once you cut it, it leaves a really rough surface, and you can't see through it anymore. It's not like glass. It's very hazy. It's kind of fogged over, if you will. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can go about this. I have seen and used the torch trick. As a matter of fact, I have a map gas torch right over there. And a lot of people will just say, hey, hit it really quick with the map gas torch, and that will make it work. And let me tell you, it does work. It does amazing wonders. The problem with it is it leaves the glass kind of wavy, because anywhere where your saw went, especially where I cut it with the bandsaw, you know, it's just a little bit wavy. What I'm going to do, which I think works much better, is to just sand this with 220 grit sandpaper, and then I have some red buffing compound on the buffer wheel, and I'll just buff after I sand it, I'll just buff it back to a clear finish. It's going to look absolutely gorgeous. Using the orbital sander on its highest speed setting, I just sanded around all of the edges and corners. Once all of the saw marks were gone, I then used the buffing wheel to bring it to a gloss again. On the bottom of the case, I added some machine screws and then put plastic standoffs on the top of them. This will support the Apple I board and the case. Just some washers and nuts needed to hold it in place. I used the same mounting method for the transformers in the back of the case. To connect the wires from the transformer to the switch, I just used this little 4-post terminal block. I then added an RCA style connector to the back of the case and soldered it to the video leads, connecting them to the Apple I video header. I added some rubber feet to the bottom of the case. The keyboard is attached to the cover using just 4 screws. Oh man, I am getting excited. But before we fire it up, we need to remove the plastic wrap from the acrylic top and place it on top of the case. I also sort of felt it wouldn't be an Apple without an Apple logo. Wow. Wow, what a fun project. I really enjoyed building this, and I tried to capture a lot of the different eras. So a little bit of the old school Apple world with the old school boards and the old school monitor, but then also a little bit of the new, like a little bit of the aluminum style, that of the John Ive era, right? And then also gotta have a little geeky with some RGB lights. Now, the truth of the matter is I really didn't need RGB lights. I did want something, because this is going to land in the museum here at the Geek Pub, and I wanted to make sure that this board was lit up. And so the RGB lighting is really always going to be white or maybe a light blue or something, right? But it will just be turned on to make sure the board's nice and bright so that when visitors come to the museum, they can look at it. But I thought for the video, it would be really awesome to just have them go crazy or something. And what I did behind the scenes is there's just a little ESP32, kind of like an Arduino, running a software package called WLED. Link in the description if you want to figure out how to do that. I have a whole article and series on the ESP32 and WLED. So anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you love the Apple I build as much as I do, and you'll probably see this in a few more videos. I need to do a reset button and a couple of other little things that I just didn't have time to do for this video to make it sort of a fully functional computer. See you in the next video.